My name is Commander Selene Rowe. I'm 42 years old, and I've led search and rescue missions on 3 continents. I've debriefed men who lost entire squads. I've stood in front of grieving parents, trying to explain why their sons never came back, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for that living room. Trina stood by the kitchen island, arms folded. Nolan, my older brother, leaned on the wall behind her with that same hollow, tired expression he wore at Dad's funeral, except this time, he had chosen to bury something else. Their 6-year-old twins, Eli and Ethan, were tearing through the living room like wild coyotes. One had a crayon stuck to his hair. The other was smearing chocolate across the glass doors. A lamp lay broken beside a tipped-over armchair. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Trina waved a dismissive hand toward the chaos. See? This is why no one lasts more than a week with them. You're a soldier, Selene, not a mother. This isn't boot camp, it's parenting. You can't help. Nolan added, almost to himself. We shouldn't have asked. And then I did what came naturally. I took one quiet breath and said, loud and clear, "Attention." Both children froze. The crayon fell from Eli's fingers. Ethan stood bolt upright. Their backs straightened. Their heels clicked together. They threw their tiny hands up to their brows in salute and shouted, "Ma'am! Yes, ma'am!" Silence dropped into the room like a weight. Trina blinked. Nolan's jaw slackened. Neither spoke. Neither moved. And the moment held, oddly reverent, strangely charged, until the boys turned in perfect unison and began tidying. Silently, efficiently. Eli picked up the armchair. Ethan wiped the chocolate off the glass with the cleanest rag he could find. No tantrums, no screams, just order. You trained them? Trina asked, stunned. I shook my head. They just needed structure, and someone who spoke their language. The twins glanced back at me, hopeful. I didn't smile. I didn't praise. I simply nodded once, and in that nod, they understood. I saw them. I respected them. In the military, we train soldiers, but sometimes what a child needs is the same thing. A voice they can trust. One that doesn't yell, but commands. That was the first moment they called me Commander Mommy, and everything changed after that. It started with an email, short, cold. Can you watch the twins for a few days? We've run out of options. That was all Nolan wrote. No hello, no please. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew what coming back meant. It meant walking into the same house where I'd once been told, "You'll never understand what family means until you stop wearing a uniform." Still, I said yes. Not for Nolan, not for Trina, for the boys. I'd only met them 3 times. Once at the hospital when they were born, once at Dad's wake, and once on a blurry video call during a deployment. But they were still my blood, still someone's sons, still 2 tiny lives who didn't ask to be caught in the fallout of their parents' exhaustion. I arrived on a Thursday. Trina opened the door without a word. She barely looked at me. Nolan wasn't home. The house was loud, too loud, toys everywhere, tablets glowing unattended, TV blasting cartoons no one was watching. Trina dropped a bottle of wine into my hand. They nap whenever, eat whatever, I'll text you when we're back. And she was gone. The boys didn't notice me at first. They were busy taping a sock to the dog. But when I stepped in and said, "Gentlemen, status report?" they turned, eyes wide, not scared, just curious. Eli whispered, "Are you the army, aunt?" I knelt to their level. "No, I'm the commander." They looked at each other, grinned, saluted. And for the first time since I arrived, I heard laughter, not screaming. That night, they wouldn't go to bed. Not until I told them a military bedtime story. So I told them about the time my unit got stuck in the Amazon jungle. They hung on to every word. Not because the story was special, but because someone was finally speaking to them like they mattered. I made one rule. Respect is earned, not demanded. But obedience, when earned, must be honored. Eli asked, "Can we call you Commander Mommy?" I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. "Only if you mean it," he nodded. "We do." And with that, I knew. This wasn't going to be a few days. This was the beginning of something neither Trina nor Nolan had seen coming. I arrived at Nolan's house in full uniform. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, especially not my sister-in-law, but because it was what I wore when I needed to remind myself who I still was. The neat creases, the polished boots, the patch on my chest that read Rowe. It gave me clarity, purpose, a spine. Trina opened the door with a sideways glance, one brow already raised before I could even say hello. She took one slow look from my boots to my collar and smirked. The kids need affection, not commands. I smiled politely. And I offer both, just not always in the order people expect. She didn't reply, just stepped aside, letting me walk into the house like I was a guest at a hotel no one wanted to be booked in. It was a mess. Crayon scribbles on the wall, a slice of pizza drying on the armrest, toys abandoned mid-play like a battlefield after retreat. It wasn't just physical clutter, it was emotional noise, residue of neglect, of exhaustion, of something much deeper than simply a rough week. Eli peeked at me from behind the couch. Ethan followed, dragging a blanket like a cape. I gave them a nod. Gentlemen, they grinned but said nothing. Their eyes, however, lit up with the unspoken thrill of recognition, like they were trying to match the woman before them with the stories they may have heard in hushed tones. Trina poured herself a drink and didn't offer me one. We're heading out around 8. Don't wait up. Nolan left a list somewhere on the fridge, or maybe the trash. Doesn't matter, just keep them alive. That line stuck with me. Just keep them alive. It was meant as a joke maybe, but to someone who's had to write letters to mothers who didn't get their sons back, it wasn't funny, it was hollow, irresponsible, and deeply sad. Trina clicked her heels across the tile and disappeared into the bedroom. I was left with the twins, and the dog, who was chewing through what looked like a tennis shoe that hadn't seen daylight since 2009. I bent down to Eli. What's the dog's name? Lieutenant Woofy, he said proudly. I nodded. Solid rank, Ethan chimed in. He doesn't listen, though. Well, I said, some lieutenants don't. They laughed. That kind of free, unfiltered laughter I hadn't heard on base in years. That first night, I didn't unpack. I didn't settle in. I just sat on the edge of the sofa, watched them, listened, learned. At dinner, they refused vegetables. I didn't argue. I pulled out an old field tactic, distraction. Whoever finishes their piece fastest gets to choose tomorrow's story. Suddenly, I had 2 green-faced champions. At bedtime, Trina emerged briefly. She leaned on the doorframe and watched as I tucked the boys in, not with songs or soft lullabies, but with a story about an aircraft carrier stranded in the Pacific. The twins asked a dozen questions. They hung on every word. Trina scoffed quietly, still treating them like cadets. I didn't correct her. I simply looked down at the boys, both calm, both still. Not cadets, just people worth respecting. She didn't like that. I could feel it. When she walked away, I was left alone again, physically present in the house, but spiritually boxed out. I wasn't their mother. I wasn't even seen as their aunt. Just a uniform who happened to share blood. But even then, I knew. Kids don't care about titles. They care about safety, consistency, truth. I'd seen soldiers follow the wrong commander because the voice sounded firm. I wasn't going to be that voice. I wasn't there to play house. I was there to be human. Even if I had to start from zero. The second floor was chaos. Not the kind of chaos I'd seen in war zones or triage centers. This was domestic entropy, the kind that builds up when no one's been in charge for far too long. A trail of half-eaten crackers led from the staircase to a fortress of pillows. Crayons exploded across the hallway. A stuffed cat had been decorated with permanent marker, one eye drawn over in green, the tail now black and spiky. The boys were mid-battle when I stepped in, Ethan wearing a colander on his head like a helmet, Eli launching Legos as projectiles. They didn't even notice me at first. I stood silently at the doorway, watched. Not with judgment, but with understanding. I had seen this behavior before, in younger recruits who'd never been taught structure, who craved attention but settled for disorder. Then I raised my voice, firm, controlled, clear. Attention. They froze mid-motion. The colander hit the ground. Eli dropped the Lego launcher. Both boys turned toward me, backs straightening instinctively. Their little hands shot up to salute, perfectly. Ma'am, yes ma'am. It wasn't play. It wasn't mockery. It was muscle memory. Downstairs, I heard Trina's wine glass hit the counter too hard. A muffled "what the" followed by hurried footsteps. Nolan trailed behind her, confused, half a breath late to every moment as usual. By the time they reached the hallway, I was kneeling before the twins, inspecting the feline artwork. "You've promoted the cat. Bold move." Eli giggled nervously. "We thought he needed stripes." I glanced up at them both. "Soldiers don't paint their comrades, unless ordered." They nodded. Behind me, Trina hissed, "What did you just say to them?" I stood slowly, brushing cat hair from my pants. I issued a command. Trina grabbed her wine again, drinking like she was rinsing something bitter from her mouth. "You're not at base, Selene. They're 6. "And yet," I said calmly, they responded. Nolan leaned against the railing. His eyes flickered from the boys to me. Something unreadable passed through his expression, resentment, maybe, or surprise. I walked over, never raising my voice. "Who taught them to salute?" He shrugged. "You haven't been here long enough to ask questions like that." I didn't reply right away, because I didn't need to. The answer was already written in how the boys stood straighter when I looked at them, how they watched my hands for cues instead of my words. Children don't mimic what they don't admire. Somewhere, at some point, they had seen something in me worth copying. Or maybe they were just waiting for someone who noticed them without sighing. I turned to the boys. "What's the mission for today?" They looked at each other, unsure. I bent to eye level. "Here's the objective. You clean this hallway. I inspect in 20 minutes. Lieutenant Woofy gets a promotion if it's done to standard." Their faces lit up. Ethan shouted, "Aye, Commander!" As they rushed to gather pillows and clean crayon marks, Trina gave a dry laugh. "You think this is sustainable? You think barking orders is parenting?" "No," I said. "But letting them spiral like this isn't parenting either." Nolan muttered something under his breath, something I didn't catch entirely, but I caught the tone, defensive, threatened. That's the thing about being the outsider in your own family. You're either too much or not enough. Too distant, too disciplined, too different. But I wasn't here for their comfort. I was here for the boys. And the boys, they were already standing taller. I stayed 4 days. It was supposed to be 2. On paper, it was just babysitting. But nothing about that house was simple. The more time I spent there, the more I realized I hadn't walked into a temporary favor. I had stepped into a fault line. Something cracked beneath the surface, and no one wanted to look down. On the first night, Ethan had trouble sleeping. He tossed, then kicked, then started crying quietly, thinking I wouldn't hear. I walked in and sat at the edge of the bed. "What's going on, soldier?" He rubbed his eyes. "The shadows move. I think someone's in the closet." I stood, opened the door slowly, let him see there was nothing there. Then I left the door slightly ajar, sat back down. "Would it help if I stayed until you fall asleep?" He nodded. "Only if you tell that story again. The one about the storm ship." "You mean the destroyer caught in the typhoon?" "Yeah, that one." He fell asleep before the ship even left port. On night 2, Eli had a stomachache. Not from food, but from panic. They'd heard Trina and Nolan fighting downstairs, not yelling, but sharp, cutting phrases. Legal threats, something about custody, something about failure. Eli didn't say it, but I saw how he crawled behind the curtain in the hallway, hidden, knees to chest. His thumb traced invisible shapes on the floor. That's when I noticed Ethan had plugged his ears with his fingers, as if he'd done this 100 times before. They weren't bad kids. They were trained to survive something no one talked about. By day 3, I stopped giving them missions and just started watching what games they made on their own. One involved a court trial. They lined up their stuffed animals, sat 2 dolls in a shoebox like a jury. "What's the charge?" I asked. "Not listening," Ethan replied. "But the judge is also guilty," Eli added. "And no one wins in the end." The way they said it, flat, matter of fact, knocked the air from my lungs. That night, I found crayon drawings in the trash. A stick figure with long hair, saluting. A dog wearing sunglasses. 2 kids holding up signs, Commander rules. One paper read, "Can you be our real family?" I didn't ask who drew it, didn't need to. At dinner, Nolan didn't come home. Trina poured wine like it was her only lifeline. She barely touched the kids' plates. Ethan asked me, Do you eat MREs every day? I smiled. Only when I forget what real food tastes like. He grinned. You could be our commander forever. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't lie. I had a base, a schedule, a life that had never made room for bedtime stories and toy courtrooms. That night, as I tucked them in, Ethan rolled over and whispered, "You're a commander, but could you also be kind of like a mom?" That hit me harder than anything I'd heard in a debrief room. I didn't know what to say, so I sat with it. Let it settle in the air between us like fog that needed time to clear. Eventually, I answered, "I'm not here forever, but while I'm here, you're safe. That's a promise." He nodded, closed his eyes, and for the first time, slept through the night. They didn't call me Aunt Selene. They called me Commander Mommy. The first time I heard it, I thought I misheard. But then Eli saluted me in the hallway, chest out, chin high, and said, "Commander Mommy reporting for dish duty." And Ethan added, "We don't burn toast on her watch." It should have made me laugh. It did, partly. But it also made something in me ache. I'd spent my whole career commanding grown men, troops, operations, protocols. But these two little boys, with their mismatched socks and their drawings of me in capes, they gave me a title no promotion ever had. A title I didn't ask for, and one I didn't feel I deserved. Trina, of course, was less amused. She watched the boys with hawk eyes that weren't looking for joy, just threats. At lunch, she set down her wine glass a little too hard and muttered, "This hero worship will wear off. They're just confused." I didn't respond. Not right away. I was slicing apples for the twins' snack, trying to pretend the tension didn't curdle the air around us, but Nolan wasn't far behind. "Selene," he said, almost apologetic. Don't give them the wrong idea." "What idea is that?" I asked. "That you'll be around, that this is permanent." I didn't look up from the cutting board. I never said it was. "But they're kids," he continued. "They don't hear what you say, they feel it. Just don't make promises you can't keep." That's when I said it. I didn't make them grow attached, Nolan. I just didn't make them feel invisible. The room went silent. Then Trina laughed, a sharp, glassy sound. How poetic, very noble. "But let me be clear, Commander, this isn't your battlefield." I dried my hands and met her gaze evenly. "I don't see a battlefield. I see two little boys learning what calm feels like." She scoffed. Nolan looked away, but that night something changed. After the boys went to bed, I went downstairs to tidy the living room. On the side table, her tablet was open. She'd left her email up, careless or maybe too confident to care. And there it was. Subject, custody prep notes for court. I should have looked away. I didn't. Inside was a thread between Trina and a lawyer named Kevin Darrell. It wasn't the legalese that got me. It was the venom. "She's not family," Trina had written. "She has no kids, no spouse, no roots. She's always belonged to the government, cold, detached. The boys need warmth. Selene's strategy, not heart. Remove her before the court sees her as a factor." My breath caught. I closed the tablet, quietly, didn't say a word. But that sentence lived in my chest like a slow-burning fuse. No roots, no heart, just strategy. Maybe she thought that was an insult. To me, it was a mirror. I had built my life on precision, discipline, and containment. But here I was, feeling more maternal in 4 days than I had in 40 years. And Trina saw it. She wasn't just threatened by what the boys felt. She was threatened by what I was waking up in myself. The next morning, I found Ethan brushing his teeth with his shirt on backward. Eli had made a mission chart: chores, nap patrol, snack ops. At the top, in red crayon, Commander Mommy's base. I smiled. Not because I was flattered, but because I realized they weren't confused. They were finally safe enough to imagine something better. Later, as I folded laundry, Nolan walked in. He didn't speak right away, just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. Finally, he said, "They've never slept through 3 nights in a row, not even with us." I looked up. "Then maybe the issue isn't me being here," I said. "Maybe it's when I'm gone." I left at dawn. No dramatic goodbyes, no tears. Just one silent glance at the bedroom door, slightly ajar, where the twins still slept. Finally, peacefully. My boots hit the pavement like they had every day for the last 2 decades. But this time, they didn't march toward a base or a mission briefing. They carried me somewhere unfamiliar, a law office. I had never walked into a room like that without a flag behind me. This time, it wasn't country, it was conscience. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't going to retreat either. I wasn't here to win the boys. I just refused to let them lose. The receptionist looked up from her desk. Name? Commander Selene Rowe, I said, then paused. Just Selene is fine. The lawyer assigned to me was a woman in her 40s, sharp, efficient, no nonsense. Her name was Danielle Vega. I explained everything, truthfully, calmly, no embellishment, no theatrics. I told her about the twins' drawings, their fear of the dark, the way Ethan asked if I could be kind of like a mom. I told her about Trina's emails, about the emotional cold front that settled over that house like winter that never left. Danielle didn't blink. Have they ever been harmed physically? No, I said. Not as far as I know. Neglected. Technically no, but emotionally, repeatedly. She leaned back, tapped her pen. You're not a guardian. You're not on any birth certificate. You're military, mobile, and unmarried. I nodded. So, she continued. You want to petition for what exactly? Not custody, I said. Not yet. I want supervised visitation. At minimum, I want a record that someone has raised concern, something in the system, something the court can't ignore when the cracks finally show. Danielle studied me a moment longer. And you're doing this because I don't believe in walking away from those who salute me. It was quiet for a beat. Then she gave a small nod. We can file a declaration, affidavit of concern. We'll reference what you observed, your background, and include that email, if you can testify it wasn't obtained unlawfully. I saw it open. I didn't hack anything. Good, she started typing. I sat there, hands clasped. No medals, no stripes. Just a gut full of questions. Had I overstepped? Was I inserting myself where I didn't belong? But then I remembered Ethan's eyes in the hallway, wide, quiet, watching the shadows like they whispered threats only he could hear. No, I wasn't inserting myself. I was anchoring them. Danielle looked up again. I'll warn you, it might make things messy. They could retaliate. I gave her a steady look. I've served in 3 active zones. I don't mind messy. As I signed the papers, my fingers trembled, not with fear, with resolve. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't defending borders, I was defending bedtime. By the end of that week, I filed for temporary guardianship, what they call a kinship caregiver petition in civilian terms. It's a strange feeling, standing in court halls without a uniform. I'm used to being saluted, referred to as Commander Rowe. But here, I was just a woman with no children of her own, asking a judge to let her be heard. Danielle had warned me, Selene, courts don't care about your medals, they want evidence, not honor, not sentiment, proof. I brought all I had. First, 3 short videos, grainy, captured on my phone. Each one filmed discreetly during my stay. The first showed Trina and Nolan arguing in the kitchen. It wasn't violent, but it was sharp, loud, and relentless. You could see Eli crawl under the table in the background, covering his ears. The second clip showed Ethan hiding behind the curtain as the yelling escalated. He whispered to himself, rocking, like he was trying to calm down. The third was hardest to film. Bedtime. Trina stormed into the twins' room, yanked the tablet from their hands, and snapped. You'll never sleep with noise like this. Grow up! Then she slammed the door. In the corner, Ethan clutched his blanket. Commander says quiet is built, not shouted, he said softly. That was the moment I hit record. Danielle watched the videos with a straight face. Then she said, this helps, but it won't be enough. So I kept digging. The boys' school was hesitant at first. Policy, privacy, red tape. But then I met with their homeroom teacher, Mrs. Langston. She'd seen the bruises, not on their bodies, but in their behavior. They're good kids, she told me. But something's not right. They flinch when voices rise. They never talk about home. And Eli once asked if he could write his will during art class. She agreed to write a letter, not accusatory, just descriptive. A timeline of the patterns she'd observed, her professional concerns, and a note about how the boys mentioned me, They talk about you like you're safe, she wrote. The final piece came unexpectedly. That night, after another long meeting with Danielle, I came back to my apartment to find a drawing slid under my door. It was from the twins, crayon, folded twice. The page showed me standing tall in a big red cape, next to two stick-figure boys holding walkie-talkies. Above, in messy handwriting, "Commander Mommy keeps us safe, even when we sleep." I didn't cry. I scanned it into the case file, and then I asked Danielle, "Can we use their own words?" "They're minors," she said, "but if they've made statements to a teacher or written things voluntarily, yes, we can reference those." So we did. We compiled everything: videos, teacher letter, the drawing, even a short audio I recorded when Eli said, unprompted, "I feel less scared when you're here. It's like we're on a mission, but it's quiet." Danielle looked over the file, then looked up at me. "This is strong," she said, "but it'll still be an uphill battle." "I've climbed hills before," I replied, "some with 40 pounds of gear on my back." That got a smile out of her. We filed the petition that same evening. As I left the office, she added, "One more thing, you'll need to testify." "I expected that. And you might be cross-examined." "I expect that too." She paused, then said something that stuck with me. "You're not just stepping up for them, Selene. You're becoming the first person who didn't leave when it got hard." I nodded. It didn't feel like bravery, it felt like breathing. The courtroom smelled like polish and old wood, the kind of scent you remember from high school gymnasiums turned voting booths. It didn't smell like justice, it smelled like waiting. I sat at the petitioner's table, calm, upright. My hands clasped gently, no uniform, just a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, posture steady. I wasn't here as Commander Rowe, I was here as Selene, aunt, witness, concerned party. Nolan and Trina walked in 10 minutes late. They didn't even look at each other. You could have mistaken them for strangers seated together by coincidence. Their lawyer rose and launched immediately into objection. "My clients find this motion offensive. Ms. Rowe is not the children's legal guardian. She's a career soldier who sees danger in everything. She's not a nurturer, she's a commander." Trina crossed her legs. Her nails were fresh. Her eyes avoided mine. Nolan looked smaller, less sure than I remembered. Then it was my turn. The judge, older, quiet, neutral, asked me to explain why I filed the petition. I stood, spoke clearly. "I am not here to steal anyone's children. I am here because 2 young boys flinch when a door slams, because they whisper instead of speak, because they salute me, not for fun, but for safety, because something inside them already understands that order can mean calm." Their lawyer interrupted. "You're not a parent, Ms. Rowe." "No," I said, "I'm not, but I know what it means to keep a promise." "And what does that have to do with parenting?" I glanced at the twins. They sat with a social worker. Ethan had drawn something on a yellow legal pad. Eli clutched a crumpled tissue. "Everything," I said, "because when you tell a child, 'I'll be back,' and then you are, they remember. When you say, 'You're safe,' and it turns out to be true, they believe. I may not have rocked them to sleep, but I listened, and I never lied." Trina finally looked at me. Her eyes were flat. "She's manipulating them," she said. "They're confused. She fills their heads with nonsense. Makes them feel like home isn't enough." I kept my voice low. "I don't need to make them feel anything. They already feel it. I'm just the one who noticed." The judge asked about my evidence. Danielle submitted the videos, the teacher's letter, the drawing, the audio. Trina's lawyer objected again. "Hearsay," the judge overruled. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. The judge asked if the children wished to speak. Ethan nodded. He walked to the front. Alone, no hesitation. He stood straight, just like I'd taught him. "My name is Ethan Rowe. I'm 6. My brother's name is Eli. He doesn't like loud noises. I pretend to be brave for him, but sometimes I'm not. When Commander Selene is here, we sleep better, and eat better, and laugh." The room was still. Then he added, "She says she's not our mom, but she acts like one, a nice one." That broke something in Nolan. I saw it. A twitch, a shift. His face softened, his fingers clenched, then relaxed. Trina whispered harshly into his ear, but he didn't respond. The judge thanked Ethan and sent him back. My heart was racing, but my spine stayed straight. Then the judge turned to me. Ms. Rowe, you say you're not seeking full custody, just legal standing to protect them. I nodded. He tapped his pen against the bench. A decision will be rendered in 72 hours. Until then, you are granted temporary supervised visitation 3 days per week. Trina stood, furious, but Nolan stayed seated. When they left, he glanced back at me. Not a glare, not a scowl. Just a man looking at his sister like he was seeing her for the first time in years. And I realized, this wasn't just about guardianship. This was about who showed up when it counted. After Ethan returned to his seat, the courtroom exhaled as one. Then the social worker stood. Ms. Latham, graying at the temples, firm voice, no wasted words. She listed her observations, the behavioral changes, the emotional patterns, the tension in the home. In my professional opinion, the children exhibit signs of emotional neglect, environmental stress, and fear responses, particularly during high-conflict interactions between the parents. She didn't need to say more. Her tone said it all. Then she added something that hit me harder than I expected. When Selene Rowe entered their lives, the children displayed increased eye contact, verbal confidence, and emotional regulation. They started initiating affection, sleeping through the night. She stepped back. No dramatics, just facts. Next, their teacher came forward, Ms. Delaney, first grade, nervous but steady. I didn't know what was going on at home, she admitted, but I saw the difference. Ethan used to flinch when someone raised their voice. Eli would hide under his desk during fire drills. She unfolded a piece of paper, one of Ethan's drawings. It's not uncommon for kids to express emotions through art. This one showed a house with no windows, just walls. But last week, he drew another. It had windows, curtains, and 2 stick figures smiling. One had short dark hair and wore something like a cape. The courtroom murmured. The judge gestured for quiet. Then came the part I hadn't fully prepared myself for. The judge asked if Eli wanted to speak. He looked so small as he stood. His shoes untied, shirt a bit wrinkled. He didn't look at anyone, until he looked at me. Then he turned to the judge and said, My name is Eli. I'm 6.5. My parents say I'm dramatic, that I cry too much, that I'm hard. He paused, swallowed hard. But Selene says I'm not too much, that I feel big things, that sometimes that's strong. No one moved. Then he whispered, My dad says I ruined Mom's career. My mom says I'm needy. But Commander doesn't say stuff like that. She just sits with me. The judge leaned forward gently. And how does that make you feel? Eli looked up wide-eyed, then said, Like I'm not broken. And finally, quietly, like I matter. A silence fell over the room so complete, I heard my own heart in my ears. Then he turned to the bench and added softly, Mom and Dad make me feel like I was a mistake. She doesn't. Trina gasped. Nolan covered his face. I didn't move, not an inch. The judge thanked Eli and asked the bailiff to escort him gently back. Then he turned to the courtroom and said, We'll take a 10-minute recess. Everyone stood. But I couldn't move, because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't fighting for custody. I was simply standing still, under the weight of something heavier than medals or ranks. I was holding their truth. The ruling was swift. Temporary guardianship granted to me, effective immediately, pending further evaluation. The courtroom didn't erupt. It deflated, like the tension had sucked the air from everyone's lungs. Trina stood stiff, her lips trembling before she erupted into tears. She spun toward me, not even trying to lower her voice. You've always been jealous, because you don't have a family. You think medals make you a mother? You're a soldier, Selene. You're not a mother. You'll never be one. The bailiff gently guided her back. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Nolan just stood there, staring down at his shoes like he couldn't figure out which direction was forward. He didn't say anything, but he didn't defend Trina either. That silence, from him, felt louder than her screams. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I shielded the twins with my coat. I didn't let go of their hands. We got in the car. I buckled them in myself. They looked tired, Not afraid, just tired. Back at my apartment, I gave them baths, made grilled cheese, and read a story, The Velveteen Rabbit. They were asleep before I finished the second page. The apartment was quiet again. I made myself tea, sat by the window, let the city hum fill the silence. Then my phone buzzed. It was from Nolan, no subject, just one line. Did you ever think I was enough? I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to answer that without unraveling a lifetime of silence between us. Instead, I thought back to when we were kids, him being the golden one, charming, athletic, our mother's pride, and me, the girl who was too quiet, too blunt, too intense, the one who lined her pencils by height and memorized military codes before bedtime. He used to call me Robo-Selene. I'd laugh it off, but I remember the sting. I remember him getting away with things I never could. And I remember the day he didn't come to my officer's pinning ceremony because, as he said, "What's the point? You're just doing what you always do, following orders." So no, maybe I hadn't always thought he was enough. Maybe I judged him too harshly because I didn't understand the pressure he was under too. And now he was a man whose children didn't feel safe, whose marriage was crumbling in a public courtroom, who just watched his sister, a woman he once called emotionally sterile, be handed the one thing he probably thought he'd never lose: their trust. It wasn't victory I felt. It was ache. For all of us. But mostly for the boy who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street, who told me monsters weren't real, only to become one he couldn't even recognize. I typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again, and finally sent. I don't know if I ever made you feel that way, but I see you now. No response came that night, but the read receipt showed up 2 minutes later. Sometimes, in families, silence isn't the absence of love. It's the place where pain goes to wait. I didn't reply to Nolan's message that night. Instead, I turned off my phone, pulled a blanket over the kids, watched them sleep, faces soft and quiet, like they hadn't known fear, like their little hearts hadn't been trained to brace for shouting. The next morning, I took them for a walk, just around the block, nothing grand. Eli insisted on holding my hand. Ethan walked a few steps ahead, pretending to scan the perimeter like a little soldier. I let them lead. We passed a bakery. They stopped, noses pressed to the glass, pointing at the cupcakes. I nodded. We went inside. It was the first time I'd bought cupcakes that weren't for a promotion ceremony or a retirement. And it was the first time I felt like I wasn't walking alone. Not since deployment. Not since, ever. They told me jokes, bad ones. The kind with chickens and roads and knock-knocks. I laughed, really laughed. And as we sat on the park bench, sugar on their faces, I felt something unfamiliar in my chest. Softness. Warm, terrifying softness. That night, after they were asleep again, I sat with my tea. Nolan's message was still there. I reread it. Did you ever think I was enough? Not, are you happy now? Not, you stole my kids. Just that. I realized something then. Nolan wasn't just the man who'd let Trina speak cruelty into my skin. He wasn't just the brother who'd ignored my homecomings, or who'd left my name off the Christmas card list year after year. He was tired and scared. He'd spent years being the man of the house, carrying burdens he didn't know how to name, trying to live up to an image our parents painted that none of us ever signed off on. He didn't know how to love, not because he didn't want to, but because he'd never been taught that love could be quiet, patient, earned. I'd spent a lifetime proving I was strong. Maybe he spent the same trying to prove he wasn't weak, and both of us failed each other. I didn't respond to his message with a lecture, or a list of what he'd done wrong, or some poetic closure. I started writing something else, not to him, but to the court. I requested family therapy. I asked that, as part of the guardianship arrangement, the kids would have access to counseling, and so would Nolan and Trina. Not because I wanted to fix them, but because I wanted the kids to see that broken doesn't mean discarded. That anger doesn't have to be inherited. I wanted to rewrite what family meant, not with shouting or silence, but with stillness, with showing up. And showing up, I learned, doesn't always mean coming home in a uniform. Sometimes it just means staying, even when it hurts. I began reading to them each night, not just stories, but poems. Letters I wrote to them when they weren't looking. I left notes in their lunchboxes. Be brave, be kind, be loud when it matters. The twins started calling me Commander Mommy more often. I let them. Trina, I heard, checked into outpatient therapy. Nolan didn't respond to my message, but a week later, I got another. Just 3 words. Thank you anyway, it was enough. For now. I brought the twins back to my place in Coronado, just a small 2-bedroom cottage near the coast, quiet and always a little windy. There was no television, no tablets, and no shouting. What they had instead was something I didn't name, but they felt it. I gave them routines. Not orders, just rhythms. Make the bed in the morning, write something you're grateful for, fold your clothes before dinner. I taught them how to tie their shoelaces with military precision and how to recognize a lie without calling it one. Ethan stopped chewing his nails. Eli no longer flinched when he dropped a glass. The cat, once drawn to hiding spots under couches, now slept right in the open, in the sunbeam on the rug. I never called myself a mother, but on the 3rd night, when I passed by their shared bedroom, I saw something that caught my breath. Ethan was scribbling in his small journal. I wasn't snooping, just curious. The page was simple, 5 words. Here, nobody yells, feels safe, no signature, just those words, underlined once, like a pledge. I stood there for a long time, hand on the doorframe, heart a little tight. They didn't call me Aunt Selene, they called me Commander Mommy. At first, it made me chuckle under my breath. Then, it made me pause. That strange title was their way of saying, you make rules, but they're fair. You lead, but you see us. Trina would have sneered. She once said, boys need soft hands, not firm commands. But I've seen boys become men with no sense of boundary, and the scars that follow. One evening, after dishes and diary time, the boys asked me to read them something. I opened an old book of military codes and read it like a bedtime story, softly, with care. We talked about honor, about not leaving your people behind. Eli asked if people could also mean family. I said yes. He nodded. Then, you didn't leave. And just like that, I knew they understood something even their parents didn't. Staying isn't about DNA. It's about not walking away when it's hard. Each morning they saluted before breakfast. Not because I asked, but because it made them feel seen. They wrote me notes and left them on the fridge. Commander Mommy, we made the bed. Commander Mommy, I helped my brother not be scared of thunder. They didn't want toys. They wanted eye contact. They wanted to be clapped for folding towels. That weekend, we built a fort in the living room, not with tech, but with couch cushions, books, and old maps. They asked if I'd ever been scared on duty. I said yes, often. Ethan asked, did you cry? I said, sometimes. But I did my job anyway. He didn't say anything back. He just nodded like it meant something to him. Later that night, I sat between them on the couch, arms around their tiny shoulders. I listened to the wind outside, to the steady rhythm of trust building, not with grand gestures, but with simple presence. No medals, no loud promises, just 2 steady heartbeats leaning on mine. I hadn't made any vow to them, but in that moment I understood. Some promises don't need words. Some families don't need permission. I stayed. 6 months passed. California's sun didn't feel any warmer, but something in me had thawed. That morning, I dressed in civilian clothes. No badges, no boots. Just a soft gray sweater the twins picked for me. You look less scary, Eli had said with a grin. I wore it like armor. The courtroom felt smaller this time. Fewer eyes, less noise, no cameras, no reporters. Just the judge, a clerk, and us. Trina wasn't there. Her absence said everything. Nolan sat alone, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at me when I entered. I didn't expect him to. I wasn't here for him. The judge reviewed the progress report. Attendance at school, perfect. Emotional health, improving. The twins were thriving. When asked if I had anything to add, I simply said, they deserve peace and consistency. The judge nodded. Your temporary guardianship will remain in place. A full custody hearing is optional, pending parental response. I didn't feel victorious, just steady, like holding a line. I gathered my documents, ready to leave. Then, from behind me, Nolan stood. The bench creaked softly. I turned. He didn't approach, didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Thank you for not leaving them." A pause, then quieter, like he was speaking from somewhere much younger than his years, he added, "And thank you for not leaving me." I didn't speak right away. I saw the boy behind his tired eyes, the boy who used to race me on bikes, who cried when our mother left, the boy who had once needed a sister and got a soldier instead. I nodded. Not as Commander Rowe, but simply Selene, his sister. Outside the courthouse, the twins waited with Ms. Grant, our caseworker. They were drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, bright blues and yellows, sunshine, stick figures, and something that looked suspiciously like a military tank. "Did you win?" Ethan asked, handing me a red chalk piece. I knelt. It wasn't about winning. It was about staying. Eli looked up. "Are you still our commander, Mommy?" I smiled. "If that's what you need me to be." They both saluted, grinning. "Ma'am? Yes, ma'am." We drove home with the windows down. Later that night, after homework and warm baths, the boys fell asleep early. No nightmares. No whispering between bunks. Just steady breathing in the dark. I stood by the doorway, watching them. And for the first time, I felt it deep in my chest. Not duty, not pride, not even relief. It was something quieter. It was love. Not the loud kind you shout across parades or pin on uniforms, but the kind that cooks oatmeal before dawn. The kind that listens to fourth-grade drama like it's diplomacy. The kind that shows up again and again, even when it's hard. I tucked the blanket under Eli's chin and kissed the top of Ethan's head. Neither stirred. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed. A message from Nolan. Just 2 words. "I'm trying." I stared at the screen, then typed 3 words back. "So am I." And I meant it. Because healing didn't come with medals. It came with moments. Moments like this. Moments worth staying for. The courtroom was half empty. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. Just 3 chairs, 2 small, 1 sturdy, and a quiet judge who read the final ruling like a whisper. The court grants permanent guardianship of Eli and Ethan Rowe to Selene Rowe as next of kin and in the best interest of the children. There was a small pause. Even the gavel didn't strike. Eli reached up, tugging gently on my sleeve. "So, now you're really our mom?" His voice didn't tremble. It was a question wrapped in certainty, not fear. I crouched beside him. "If you keep calling, I'll keep showing up." Ethan leaned his head against my shoulder. "Even when we're big?" "Especially then," I said. He smiled like it was the first day of summer. That night, back at the small house in Coronado, we made spaghetti. Not out of celebration, but because it was what we always made on Thursdays. Routine, not fanfare. I set the plates on the table. Eli folded napkins. Ethan poured water carefully, like handling a mission-critical operation. We sat. No prayers, but a pause. A silence of recognition. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ocean. Inside, our little dining room glowed with the quiet dignity of a home built from fragments. Midway through dinner, Ethan looked up, sauce on his chin. "Can we tell people you're our commander, Mommy?" I wiped his face, nodded. "You can tell them anything that's true to your heart." He turned to Eli. "We should write it on the mailbox." Eli nodded. "Commander Mommy lives here now." And just like that, my title became a bridge between discipline and devotion, between structure and safety. Later, when they were in pajamas and brushing teeth, I opened my laptop. A new email from Nolan. No subject line, just a sentence. "I see now you were always the strongest among us." I stared at the screen. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. And somehow, that made it harder. The twins settled into bed, 2 lumps under warm blankets. I tucked the edges in, one by one. "Good night, soldiers," I whispered. "Good night, Commander Mommy," they echoed back, in unison. Not as a game, but as a ritual. I turned off the lights and sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. There were no medals on these walls, no plaques, No rank insignia, just finger paintings and sticky notes saying I love you. And yet, I'd never felt more decorated. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared. It had merely rearranged itself, turned from armor into purpose. Selene Rowe, U.S. Navy Commander. Now Selene Rowe, legal guardian. And when Ethan woke up with a nightmare that night, I became Selene Rowe, the one who stayed. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the bedtime stories told, I stepped outside with a wooden plaque I'd carved myself. The letters were uneven, but I didn't mind. They read, Fort Rowe, authorized personnel only. I smiled at the irony. It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary and a blessing. I planted it right at the front steps, not to keep the world out, but to remind us that inside these walls, we had finally built something sacred. Not perfect, but honest, not silent, but safe. The wind rustled slightly, and then I heard it. Commander Mommy, Eli's voice called out behind me. I turned. He stood there in his mismatched pajamas, clutching a plastic dinosaur, his face lit with something I hadn't seen before, peace. We're back, he said proudly. Ethan stood just behind him, lifting 2 fingers in a salute. Permission to enter base? I laughed, soft and full. A laugh that belonged to no one but me. Not to the commander, not to the sister, just me. A woman who stayed. I opened my arms. Permission granted, soldiers. Welcome home. They both ran past, giggling, and the door slammed shut behind them with a sound that was no longer jarring, but warm. Later that night, after tucking them in and whispering our now daily ritual, safe, strong, seen, I lingered beside the door. I didn't move. I didn't scroll my phone, didn't make plans. I just listened. The gentle breathing of children who no longer feared the dark. The hum of a home no longer wrapped in tension. The echoes of the woman I used to be. And the one I was becoming. I walked outside once more, under the porch light, and looked at that sign again. Fort Rowe. It wasn't just a joke. It was a promise. Not every battle requires boots and medals. Some just need someone to stay, to show up, to hold the line when it matters most. And as I stood there, breathing in the cool night, I whispered 3 words to the wind. Mission accepted, always. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with sunlight on your kitchen counter and coffee in your hand? Or is it one of those long nights where stories like this hold you steady? Wherever you are, we're truly grateful you chose to be here, with us. And if this story touched your heart, if Selene's quiet strength or the children's small triumphs meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of something gentle, something true, a community that still believes in kindness, in growth, and in second chances. And if you're carrying something heavy right now, remember this: sometimes the miracle you're waiting for doesn't knock. It just stands quietly beside you, waiting for the day you're ready to open your heart again. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.